中共持续对我认知作战，试图多层面影响国人认知，削弱我国军民士气与团结，以创造有利中共的资讯环境。面对中国认知作战，国防部持续强化的多元反制作为，针对网络错假讯息，除立即查证并通报相关单位，共同执行网络溯源及应处。
That is Taiwan's Defense Minister Wellington Koo telling the reporters on October 17th that China is increasingly using psychological and cognitive warfare as part of its gray zone operations against Taiwan. His comment came after China conducted its Joint SOAR 2024B military exercise, mobilizing its Army, Navy, Air Force, and rocket force in the Taiwan Strait, as well as the north, south, and east of Taiwan, simulating a blockade. And on October 22nd, it held live fire drills near Taiwan again.
China conducted live ammunition drills at Niusan Island, an island part of Fujian province that is located just south of Taiwan's Matsu Islands, starting at 9 a.m. this Tuesday. Taiwan's Defense Ministry has confirmed these drills are part of the PLA's routine training. However, Taiwanese government officials believe it constitutes a necessary provocation, especially following the recent spate of Chinese military activity in the areas surrounding Taiwan.
How should Taiwan and the international community respond to China's military provocations that threaten the freedom and safety of Taiwanese people? You're listening to The Divide. My name is Iris Xu.
As part of a long-standing series of mainland bullying, provocations, intimidation, and attempt to frighten the people of Taiwan.
That is how a maritime security expert described China's frequent military maneuvers recently.
I'm Seth Cropsey, and I'm president of Yorktown Institute, which is a think tank in Washington that's focused on grand strategy and increasing competition between the great powers.
Mr. Seth Cropsey served as Deputy Undersecretary of the Navy in the Ronald Reagan and George H.W. Bush administrations. In the Bush administration, Cropsey moved to the office of the Secretary of Defense to become Acting Assistant Secretary and then Principal Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense for Special Operations and Low-Intensity Conflict. And with all his expertise and career experience, I asked Seth whether he thinks China is making credible threats.
I think that they are serious, and yes, they're credible. It depends upon what you mean by credible. If you mean, do they signal an imminent mainland invasion of Taiwan, I wouldn't say that's credible. But do they signal Beijing's long-term effort to subdue Taiwan and remove its democratic government and replace it with a communist one? Yes.
And what should be the proportional response from Taiwan and the U.S.? Given that these military exercises aren't infringing on everyone's freedom of navigation.
I think that you get a little taste of a proportional response from the transit recently conducted, I think it was on October 20th, of an Arleigh Burke class guided missile destroyer, the USS Higgins, and a Royal Canadian Navy Halifax class frigate, the HMCS Vancouver, which conducted a routine transit of the high seas, the area that is not claimed or owned in any way by any state through the Taiwan Strait. That's a small version of what is needed. A more proportional response would be to use more ships, larger ones, and to conduct these freedom of navigation transits more often than they're being conducted right now. And there's a whole list of other things that ought to happen as well, which I think constitute a proportional response. The purpose of these transits is to maintain the right of passing through international waters. To the extent that it's done, that freedom of navigation is established and it's supported. If you don't do that, then people who or countries that claim the international waters as national, as sovereign waters, their claim is increased. So it's important to demonstrate that we do not recognize that claim and that we do in fact protect freedom of navigation in international waters.
The Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Higgins and Royal Canadian Navy Halifax-class frigates HMCS Vancouver conducted a routine Taiwan Strait transit on October 20th. Beijing said the transit of the U.S. and Canadian warships undermined peace and stability in the region and that it had mobilized naval and air forces to monitor them. But is sending a destroyer the same as sending an aircraft carrier?
A destroyer, it does not have the firepower of an aircraft carrier. It doesn't have the offensive or defensive capability of an aircraft carrier, and an aircraft carrier, in fact, is accompanied by surface ships to protect it. So that multiplies the effect of a passage of an aircraft carrier passing through international waters.
So what's the message the US and Canada are trying to send through this transit? Here's the Pentagon's press secretary, Air Force Major General Pat Ryder, briefing the media on October 22nd.
The Arleigh Burke-class guided missile destroyer USS Higgins and Royal Canadian Navy Halifax-class frigate HMCS Vancouver conducted a routine Taiwan Strait transit on October 20 through waters where high seas freedom of navigation and overflight apply in accordance with international law. The ship's transit through the Taiwan Strait demonstrates the U.S. and Canada's commitment to a free and open Indo-Pacific. The United States military flies, sails, and operates anywhere international laws allows. So, thank you very much. Yes, sir.
So, aside from the U.S., is Taiwan's own navy capable of defending the country from invasion of the PLA Navy?
Could Taiwan's Navy defeat the PLAN? I think that would be a long shot. There are things that Taiwan's Navy can do, but for example, to make it more difficult for the mainland to conduct an amphibious invasion. But a direct confrontation between Taiwan's Navy and the mainland's Navy, I don't think that Taiwan would be interested in doing that.
U.S. Chief of Naval Operations Admiral Lisa Franchetti recently released Navigation Plan for America's Warfighting Navy 2024, in which she described China as on a war footing. I asked Seth whether he thinks this is a fair assessment.
Yes, I do. That's correct. It is it's increasing its fleet. It's building more aircraft carriers, which give it the ability to project power not only in the immediate region, but around the world. It's increasing its production of missiles, and it's has not backed down on its promise to, or its threat to use force if necessary. All of that looks like a country that is preparing for a conflict, both materially and in diplomatic terms. Their statements all indicate that that conflict is definitely a part of their calculations if they don't succeed by other means.
In Admiral Lisa Franchetti's 2024 navigation plan, she identifies two overarching strategic ends, and one of them is readiness for the possibility of war with China by 2027.
I think the threat of a war by 2027 should be taken extremely seriously. Yes, but there are other issues that the mainland has to think about, and one of the first of them is the war in Ukraine. What's the lesson from the war in Ukraine? Putin thought that he could simply take Ukraine in a week, And that was 2 years ago. And he's failed to do it. There's no there's no sea between Russia and Ukraine. All he has to do is drive his tanks across the border or send his infantry or his armored units. There is the Taiwan Strait that separates the mainland from Taiwan, and crossing that successfully and establishing what's called a lodgment by force is much more difficult than simply rolling tanks across the border. And the lesson of Ukraine for Xi Jinping is it might not be as easy as he thinks.
As much as people are reluctant to think about the possibility of war, I have to know, what are the PLA Navy's weaknesses?
They haven't fought a naval conflict in memory, and in fact, they haven't fought a naval conflict, and they haven't conducted a successful opposed amphibious invasion anywhere. Those are very difficult operations. It's not just getting in your car, turning it on, and driving off to the supermarket. It's much more difficult than that. And if they're smart, they probably understand that. It requires a tremendous amount of coordination and practice and materials and ships and the ability to resupply those ships. And it would not be an uncontested environment, which is to say, neither Taiwan nor I hope the United States would simply sit there and allow the mainland to do what it wants. So it's not as easy as just giving an order, go and conduct an amphibious invasion against Taiwan. It's not that easy.
Taiwan is not the only country that is facing China's military harassment. On Thursday, Indonesia says its patrol ship drove away a Chinese Coast Guard vessel away from a survey vessel in the South China Sea for the second time in 4 days. And in August alone, China and the Philippines reported 6 confrontations in the South China Sea. Maybe it is very naive of me, but I asked Seth whether he thinks these confrontations by China are intentional.
Oh, they are as intentional could possibly be. It's all part of a policy to intimidate, to bully, to frighten, and to make the countries that they're conducting these aggressive actions against believe that there is no future other than one in which the mainland dominates the region. That's the objective.
Is there anything that we can do to dissuade China from starting a conflict?
Yes, I do. I think that um, larger forces, larger U.S. forces, naval forces, especially in the region, combined operations between all the countries that are threatened by the Communist Party's aggression, command centers in which the U.S. and Taiwan and even Japan work, more military exercise, more naval exercises between the countries that are endangered by the mainland's aggression, a greater emphasis on Taiwan's reserve forces, a larger Taiwanese navy are some of the measures that would convince the Chinese Communist Party that the Taiwan and its allies and partners around the world are serious about defending Taiwan. And the Canadians are a good example. Canada sent a frigate to accompany the American destroyer, and there's a good reason for that. It's not only that Canada understands that freedom of navigation is important to their economic future, but that it also understands what the threat to freedom worldwide, the global threat to freedom is if China simply can invade other countries the way Russia has invaded Ukraine. And on the trade side, Canada's total trade with Taiwan last year was something around $12 billion, about $2.5 billion in exports and $9.5 billion in imports. So Canada, like many other countries in the world, has important commercial relations with Taiwan and would like to see those, doesn't want to see those endangered by a conflict. And the same thing can be said of European states who are gradually realizing the stake that they have in a peaceful region where China does not rule by force.
For other countries to realize that they also have a stake in the Taiwan Strait, it might take a while. But as more countries are coming to that realization, what are the future outlook for Taiwan?
I think Taiwan is in a difficult position, but my own experience is that Taiwan has some distinguished leaders and is determined to survive as a free entity. I also think the United States could do more than it's done in terms of supplying the weapons that it's promised Taiwan, and also to reconsider its policy of not recognizing Taiwan, or not stating unambiguously that it would defend Taiwan if attacked.
It really is time for Taiwan to be recognized by the international community, especially the democratic world. But that is out of Taiwan's control. Meanwhile, we're doing everything we can to defend ourselves.
Military enthusiasts in Taiwan have captured detailed images of the country's domestically developed underwater drone, the Huilong. In September, the unmanned underwater vehicle, co-developed by the National Zhongzhen Institute of Science and Technology and Longde Shipbuilding, underwent its first sea trials. While only a portion of Huilong's upper section was visible then, the latest images revealed its 30-meter length, 6-meter hull, and its most notable armament, 2 torpedo tubes located at the bow. Although the Defense Ministry has previously stated that the Huilong was not developed for any specific military purposes, anticipation is growing as to how the vessel might integrate with Taiwan's military forces in the future. Meanwhile, a photograph of a Chinese People's Liberation Army submarine conducting sea trials has been circulating on social media. Institute for National Defense Security Research Director Su Ziyun remarked that the PLA's nuclear attack submarines have the capability to launch land attack cruise missiles from underwater, posing a major threat to Taiwan. Both Taiwan and China continue to actively develop their underwater combat capabilities as more of their efforts surface online. Joey Chow for RTI News.
Thank you for listening. This episode of The Divide is produced by Radio Taiwan International.
Hey, it's Michelle, your host of Geek Out, where you can listen in on people's passions in Taiwan and around the world every Thursday. What's your cup of tea, tickles your fancy, or floats your boat? Geek Out guests get up close and personal on topics from Dungeons & Dragons to mental health awareness to herpetology, and so much more. Thanks for listening to Radio Taiwan International. Check out Geek Out and a plethora of other awesome shows on the website at en.rti.org.tw. And don't forget to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter. See you there!